Hey there YouTube, and welcome to another mix breakdown. And today we're going to be covering Wage War High Horse. Just released this video on Monday, so if you're watching this now, I've just released it. So I hope you've enjoyed working on the multi-track and MIDI, and today we're going to go ahead and see what I was able to do in order to recreate this song. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Awesome. Now, before we actually get started, I want to go ahead and remind you, go to the download link down in the description below. There you can go ahead and find the Google Drive link that will then allow you to download the zip file that will contain the MIDI and also the audio tracks for this session. You can then go ahead and load those into your DAW of choice in case you want to follow along. Now, if you do have Pro Tools, what you can simply do is download the same file, and included will be the Pro Tools session. There you can go ahead and open it up and you'll see all the plugins and the settings available there. Now, with that being said, before we actually get started in the mixing, what I want to go ahead and do is look at the samples that we use in order to recreate this song. So let's go ahead and start off with the drums to see what we did. All right, so first thing we're going to go ahead and take a look at is the kick here. So as you can see, we're using Corey Bretterman's Massive Metal kick. Now, there's two different types with the Massive Metal 3 kick. There's going to be the regular kick sound and then the alt sound. So this is going to be alt. Let's go ahead and take a quick listen to what this sounds like. Really awesome sounding, nice, high end, good punch to it. It really cuts through in a mix. It sounds really good, and I like it a lot. Let's go ahead and look at the snare next. So this is going to actually be by Tight Sounds. There's Metal 5 snare. Really great sounding snare on itself. Has a lot of processing, but sounds good. Let's take a listen. Sounds great. All right, let's look at the toms here. Now, toms, special story here. This is actually my own drum sample pack that I created. This is the Dark Horse kit. Now, what's special about this, aside from the fact that I recorded it, is that this was using a Dark Horse drum kit, and we recorded in a 7,000 square foot studio here in Tampa. It was recorded in an old like 1950s movie theater that closed down years ago and then was converted into a recording studio. And where the seats used to be in the movie theater, it was the live stage, and where the projector was is actually where the recording where the console was, the actual main room was. So it's really, really cool. Has a very awesome sound. Let's take a listen to what these drums sound like. Actually, let me go ahead and turn on this kick. Let's just run through it. Nice, good sounding kick, snare, and then our toms, which is what we're going to be using for this track. So we have two toms, our rack and our floor. We have our hi-hat, and then we have our other cymbals as well. So this, I believe, is going to be a splash. Then our two crashes. I believe this is going to be our China. And then I think this is going to be our ride here. And the last two are going to be bells. Awesome. So for the toms, we're using this kit. And then I believe also for the cymbals, yep, we're using the same thing as well. So this will be for sale. I'm debating whether this is going to be included either in the Patreon membership or if I'll just have a website where you can do it. But either way, I plan on selling this for very inexpensive price, maybe $10 or so. I have to look into the logistics of it. But again, even if you don't have this this drum kit, even though it won't be available to you, you will have the audio files you can use, or again, you will have the MIDI in case you want to use your own drums. So something to remember there. Let's go ahead and move on next to the bass. Let's see what we used here. DjinnBass, really awesome sounding bass here. Obviously, this is going to be the DI. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what this sounds like over here. I'm going to go ahead and actually increase the size of these. Let's make them small at least. There we go. And let's go ahead and zoom in just a little bit. This is going to be the beginning section. So let's take a listen here. Might be good if we solo it. Yeah, sounds really, really good. Awesome. Let's go over to the next sample pack that we're using. Obviously, this is going to be Odin again. We have this set to the rhythm since we are using the rhythm guitars, giving us that slightly different performance of the same composition there. Let's take a quick listen. Man, I think Wage War right now, like over the years, they have yet to disappoint me, especially with their album Maniac that came out not too long ago. They have really great stuff. I love it. So, all right, let's go ahead and look at what we did for this telephone center guitar. We're using Odin again, but we're using the Guitar 1 just to have that center mono performance. And then lastly, we have our lead guitar here. And for the lead guitar, let's switch this over to guitar 2. Even though the center guitar is not playing at the same time as that, it's just good practice to make sure that you're using the different patches so that way they don't collide and overlap and possibly repeat the same note. And that way it turns into a mono performance or jumps over one another. So just make sure you go ahead and do that here. And then let's go ahead and look at what we did for our samples and also for our synthesizers. So looks like we have another impact over here. This is going to be for bass drops and stuff. And it looks like we're using Gravity, which is another one that I haven't used actually in a while. And let's take a listen to what this is doing here. So we have this section. Let's go ahead and just take a quick listen. Actually, let's go ahead and turn that up too. That's pretty quiet at -4. Let's turn it up over here. Let's go like, I don't know, 15. Hopefully it won't clip it, and I'll do the -4 here again. So this crushing space sound effect definitely adds some impact, as the name implies here. So okay, we got that. Let's go ahead and look to see what we're doing with these synthesizers here. So this looks like to be a buzz synthesizer, and we're using FabFilter's Twin 2, a little bit of a different synthesizer that I normally use. Usually I'll use something like a Hive or Serum, but today we elected to use this. Let's hear what we got going on here. This is at -17. Let me turn that up. Obviously, it's repeating the main riff, and I think this is just to add a little layer of thickness to what's already going on. Let's hear that with the guitars. Let me actually set my solo setting here to latch, and now let's take a listen to it. Yeah, so that's going to sound really nice when it's all blended in together. All right, let's go ahead and look at this Plux synth. It looks like it's going to be repeating the same riff. And this is going to be with the FabFilter 1, another synthesizer that they make as well. Let's take a listen. Let's go ahead and turn that up. It's so simple. It's a very simple sounding synth, but it sounds really good. All right, excellent. So that covers the synthesizers. Now let's go ahead and look at this drone. Again, just adding some ominous tone and kind of setting the mood before the song actually starts. So we're using Contact, and we're using this patch called Galactica, and this is going to be by a library called Photosynthesis. Let's go ahead and take a listen to this. I'll go ahead. This is at -12. Let's crank this back up to 0. And here we go. Spooky eeriness. Honestly, it kind of reminds me of The Dark Knight with Batman, that kind of like creeping violin sound, but I think it sounded perfect for the intro of this song. So, but that so far covers everything from a MIDI standpoint. Let's look at what other samples we have here. So it looks like only other thing we have here is a bass drop. We go ahead and I'll make this active really quickly. And this is just happening when we're going back into the riffs and breakdowns and such. Let's go ahead, and this is at -7. We'll solo this. And let's bring this up to 0. So very plain and simple. If we wanted to, we could add distortion to it later or not. Sometimes what I generally lean to doing is using different impacts. I have a little bit more grit, like what we saw with Gravity, and then I'll add the bass drop in just purely for that low end subs and stuff, but sounds good. And again, it's gonna be blended in with everything else when we move forward in the mix. So that covers all of our different sound sources. Now we're gonna go ahead and actually start mixing. So let's go ahead and move on to the drums. Okay, and as a final reminder, I just want to let you know to go ahead and adjust your volume on your monitors or your headphones accordingly. The volume of the mix will be changing as we move along. They'll be getting louder. So at the beginning portions will be quieter, so you might have to turn it up, but remember to adjust it down as we go along. So we have this kick. Let's go ahead and take a look here to see what we did. Let me go ahead and make sure we have everything turned off. Let's see. There we go. So for this kick, let's go ahead and take a listen to what it sounds like on its own again. Remind ourselves. Again, it already sounds great on its own. All we're going to go ahead and do here is we've done some cuts here just to go ahead and really just kind of shape it that for what would be appropriate to the mix. But we gotten rid of everything below 20. We then also have a negative 3.43 dip, and that's going to be at 250 or 233 hertz. It's going to be kind of a narrow Q there, as you can see. Then we have a more broad Q of a dip, and that's going to be at 405, and that's going to be minus 1.96 dB. We then have negative 3.73, and that's going to be at 2,238 hertz. And then we also have our last dip, and that's going to be at 6,322 hertz, and that's going to be minus 1.63. Now, as you can see this here, this is probably just kind of trying to tame a little bit of that high-end clickiness from the kick, and then also just pulling a little bit of some of the body and some of these, like this midsection here. Let's take a listen to what it sounds like without and then with. Starting without. And with. So you can really hear we're really trying to tame that high end a little bit, just so that way it fits a little better with the rest of the mix. Let's see what we use next here. It looks like it's going to be a multi-band compressor. And you can kind of see from these different mix breakdown videos kind of what my routine is. It's generally, especially with drums, I like to use an EQ to shape it to the sound that I want. And then I'll go ahead and use something like a multi-band compressor to shape it. And then occasionally what I'll do is I'll add some additional tone to it by adding color, whether it's going to be through some sort of console emulation, or whether I drive them all into a bus and then add the color later. So, but right now, this is going to be our multi-band compressor. Let's go ahead and run through what the numbers are. We're going to go from left to right on the different thresholds. So starting with the first, we have a threshold of negative 16.64. The attack is going to be 20%, release is at 20%. We didn't do anything on the range, and we didn't do anything here on the output. Now, these middle bands looks like we did something maybe a little bit different. So let's move on and see what we did here. So let's see, actually, hold on. Nope. We actually left it alone. We didn't do anything with that. So band number 2, threshold is going to be negative 42.8, attack of 20, release of 20. Band 3 is negative 40.92, attack of 20, release of 20 as well. Might be 20 across the board. Band 4, negative 23.88, attack is 20, release is 20. And then our last band, yep, looks like the same thing. Our attack release is at 20, and then our band, or our threshold, excuse me, is going to be negative 28.86. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like without and with. So really just trying to, it's pulling down on everything, but we really want to try to, grip onto that low end, making sure that it's not going to be sticking out too much in the rest of the mix, just being a little bit more controlled there. And then let's go ahead and move on next to our snare. I'll go ahead and solo that. Let's take a listen to this. Oh, and last thing on the kick, it looks like we have -2, and the snare is also going to be -2 on the fader here. So snare sounds good on its own. Let's go ahead and see what we did with EQ. All right, so something similar here. We took away everything below 100. Seems kind of dramatic, but again, we only want to keep what we can audibly hear without it getting muddy with everything else in the mix. So again, we've elected to use everything above 100. And then we have a -1.39 dB at 463 hertz. We then have another -1.63 dB at 3066 hertz. And another -1.39 dB, and that's going to be at 6,516 hertz. And our last dip is going to be -1.47 dB, and that's going to be at 12,351. Let's take a listen. Without. With. So it gives it overall a little bit of a darker tone. We do want the snap, but I like a little bit of that darker tone. It feels a little bit more like a lower tuned snare, even though we didn't really change the tuning. It's all that we're doing is affecting the high end of it. So, but I do like how that sounds. Let's go ahead and look to see what we did on our multi-band compressor. I think we might have did the same thing before where we just messed around with the threshold, but let's take a look. Starting with the first band, -23.1 dB, attack is 20, release at 20. In fact, I'm going to just look at this right now, make it easier for you guys. 2020, 2020, 2020. Man, I am seeing 2020. All right, so on all the bands, we have 2020 for the attack and release. So let's just focus on the threshold. Band number 2, -42.8. Band number 3, -40.92. Band number 3, -23.8. And the last band is going to be negative 28.6. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like. This is with. This is without. So as you can hear, it's really pulling down on that snare, especially with that when you hear the snare, the body of it, that low end that you can see in this band, it's really pulling down on it, controlling it there. Awesome. Let's go ahead and take a look at our toms here. Again, this is from my kit that I recorded. Let's just take this section here. Let's try more like this here, the tail end too. Awesome. Let's go ahead and look what we did with EQ. This actually looks like it might have just been copied straight from the snare, maybe adjusted a little bit, but let's take a look here. So we've actually got rid of everything below 40 Hertz. We don't want too much of that low end. Then we have a dip of negative 1.39 dB, and that's going to be at 463 Hertz, minus 1.63 dB, and that's going to be at 3066 Hertz. Negative 1.39, and that's at 6,500 Hertz. And then our last one is negative 1.47 at 12,351. So very similar. We just adjusted. It looks like the high end. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like without and with. This is without and with. So just kind of controlling a little bit of that snap from the toms. All right. I'm going to go ahead and check again. Let's see what we did here. If we got 2020 through all the way through. Yep. Oh, yeah. Yep. I wonder if it's going to be the last one. Nope. 2020 all the way through. So let's look at our thresholds here then. So for the multi-band compressor, we have starting on the first band, negative 16.64. Next band is negative 42.8. Third band is going to be negative 40.92. The fourth band is going to be negative 23.8, and the last band is going to be negative 28.86. Let's take a listen without and with, starting without. And with. You can see this thing is really yanking on these drums, but you still get a lot of the integral sound of the toms though, so it still sounds good to me there. And then let's go ahead and listen to the cymbals. Let's go ahead and solo this and find a section. We'll just pick this beginning part. So at the beginning, I had it bypass this EQ, but I turned it on. We're using the FabFilter Q3. Use whatever EQ you would like, but we are doing a lot of cutting here, especially with a lot of notches. But we first started off with getting rid of everything behind below 300 Hertz. If it's information we're not going to hear or use, get rid of it. We don't need it. Then it looks like we have these really tight notches across these different frequencies. And that's because cymbals are great, but sometimes they can produce these different notches that kind of can be a little bit irritating. So let's see what we did here. Negative 11, and that's going to be at 463. Negative 6 at 1,147, negative 6 at 1,449, so 1,500, and then negative 4.24, and that's going to be at 3,309. And then we have another negative 6 at 3,572, and then our last notch is going to be at 4,666. All right, and let's find also another section too where we can hear some other stuff aside China. Let's try like maybe, I don't know, this right here. Let's see what we got. Let's listen without. And I wonder if you guys can hear the difference. I'm going to go ahead and solo some of these to that we can hear what those sounds are that I'm talking about. Yeah, you can hear that pretty clearly. So if we're not cutting that, that's going to be more audible in your mix. So good thing we're cutting it out. Let's listen to some of the other ones. Yeah, so you guys can kind of hear what we're getting rid of there. So it's good that we're controlling that. Let's go ahead and now look at the multi-band compressor. Again, let's see, 20, 20, 20, and 20. Honestly, I wish I just had a master compressor. Just leave it all on 20, control it all, and just adjust the threshold. That's essentially all I'm doing here. So let's look at the thresholds here. Negative 90 on the first band, and really that's just to make sure we have no information below that 300 that is getting through. Let's see, our next band, -50, kind of doing the same thing because we don't have too much information going on here. Third band, -40.37. Fourth band, -32.75. And the last band, -29. So let's listen to what that's going to do here. Without and with. So you can see it's pretty interesting. Even though we cut everything below 300, we're still getting some information that's actually, you know, activating everything below 200 all the way to 50. So it's good to keep in mind considering maybe using a multi-band compressor even after you do a cut, because there can still be some leftover information there that we need to control. So that's what we did with the cymbals there. Let's hear what this sounds like all collectively together, all the drums. So let's go ahead and do this beginning section of the song. So as you can hear, I turned off these the EQ, and it kind of sounded like, they sounded good, but like independent drums. But now when we play them together, it sounds more like a cohesive kit. Let's give it another listen. Yeah, sounds really good. Awesome. So next thing we're going to be looking at next is going to be the drum reverb and then the drum sum. Let's go ahead and look at it. So what we're going to go ahead and do is pull up the drum reverb that we've used here. So it looks like today we are using the Lexicon again, another great sounding reverb plugin. This is going to be the MPX native reverb. Looks like we're using the medium plate as the category and medium plate as the preset. What I'm going to go ahead and do is turn on actually these different sends, and let's move over to the mix view in Pro Tools and see what we got. So it looks like for the kick we have -24.5, and the reason for that is I like to include kick in the reverb, but it can sound very muddy very fast for the rest of the drums in there, so I like to include it, but very subtle amount. Then for our snare, it looks like we have this set to 0. I'd like to have that up in the front and center just to get the most bloom, so to say, from the reverb when having the snare sent through it. Next is our toms. It's going to be a -2, kind of pulled in a little bit away. We want to have that tail end from the reverb, but we don't want it to overtake the snare. We might adjust these settings later on, but that's where we have it for now. And then our cymbals. Cymbals is at -11. And this is generally what I do when I am doing reverb, like sends from the drums into a reverb, is I'll go ahead and have kick at the lowest, cymbals second lowest, toms coming in at third, and then at neutral volume, generally speaking, is going to be the snare. So that is just generally what I do. Again, I think it's a good balance to make sure that you don't have these super bleeding, cymbal sounds going into your reverb. Your kick is not overloading the reverb, and you really are focusing on having the snares and toms that are getting that tail end of the reverb sound that we usually like to hear on records. So okay, now let's go ahead and look at what we used here on our preset. So looks like on the reflections it's -2.5 dB. Reverb level is going to be -0.5 dB. The color on this is going to be neutral, and then we have the roll off here, and that's going to be 8,250. The diffusion is at 100%. Reverb time is at 1.29 seconds, and then our milliseconds for pre-delay is going to be 10, and then our mix is 100%, of course, because this is going to be a send. Let's go ahead and solo this. Let's take that same section from earlier and hear what that sounds like. Sounds really good. Let's hear what that sounds like with the rest of the drums. This is with the reverb. Let's go ahead and turn it off. With. And just gives it a room for it to all kind of blend together. Now the mix in there, you can audibly hear it. We can turn that down a little bit. I think we get away with it because with all the other elements and the drums and stuff, we cranked it up just a little bit to make sure that we can still hear the tail end of it. So even though soloed, it might be a little too wet for our liking. Obviously what really matters is how it sounds like when it's all collectively brought together. So, all right, next let's go ahead and look at what we did on the drum aux. also known as the drum sum. So it looks like we have this virtual channel here we're using on the USA setting for the Slate Digital Virtual Mix Rack. We didn't change anything with the inputs. We have the drive set to 6, and then we also have this compressor here called the Monster. Let's go ahead and run through these settings here really quickly. We have an attack at 3.96, a release at 5.78, an attack, hold on, yep, or excuse me, the input, that's gonna be at 0. That's what confusing, like not another attack. Output's gonna be at 9.22. Punch looks like it is disabled, and then our high pass filter is off. We could go ahead and use this if we wanted to kind of tame a little bit of that interaction with the low end, but we left it alone. And then we have this high dead. I've never used this before, so I left it be. And the mix is only at 8%. So we're kind of using this here, not kind of, we are using this as parallel compression. We're using it very, very subtly. So with that being said, let's hear what this sounds like off and then on. So here's how the drums sound like on their own. Go ahead and turn it on. Off. And back on. So you can definitely hear that interaction that it's playing around with, especially with the virtual mix channel. It's adding a little bit more of that energy, you know, that console emulation to it. So it sounds really nice and really good. So now that's the drums. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we did with the bass. All right, so for our bass, let's go ahead and take a quick listen to what we did here. Actually, I don't know if we even covered what oh no, we did cover it. All right, so for our bass, let's go ahead and remind ourselves what it sounds like. Remember, we're using the DjinnBass, so let's go ahead and take a listen. So really solid DI sound coming from that sample pack, but we're gonna go ahead and pair this with, again, our Parallax a plugin that we're using here from Neural DSP, and we're using this preset over here. It sounds really good on its own. I don't think we changed anything with the settings. Let's go ahead and change the oversampling though to high, because why not? If we have the CPU utilization for it, let's do it. Let's go ahead and listen. So a lot of distortion and grit, still have the low end. You can still hear the notes. It's got some gain to it, but it sounds really nice, sounds really good. Let's go ahead and move next on the list here. So this is just the default EQ with Pro Tools that I use. Obviously, you can use whichever one you have. Looks like we're going ahead and we're getting rid of everything below 50, and we have the Q. It looks like it's at 24 over here. It looks like here in the low or in the mids, or excuse me, and the lows, we have a cut of -2.3 at 2.75. Or 275. We have another dip here that's going to be at 1870 hertz, and that's going to be minus 2.4. We have a narrow Q, kind of taming a little bit of that treble from the bass sound, from the tone of -4, and that's going to be at 2600 hertz. And then we didn't do anything else with the high end. So if we wanted to, we can maybe get away doing some cuts like this to get some of that high end energy out of there. In fact, let's take a listen to what that would sound like. So this is without and then with, starting without. Let's listen with. Without. And with. So for me, I feel like that has a more balanced tone overall, even with the different variations between the lower and the higher notes. I really like the way how that sounds. So let's go ahead and jump over to our next plugin, which is Q-Clone. Hey, what do you know? It looks like I actually already did the cut. So let's go ahead and actually remove this high pass filter then that we did here, and because we're doing it here in Q-Clone. Now, let's see here. We did everything below 30 is gone. Below 30 hertz is gone. We have some more dips. So -2.48, and that's gonna be at 111. -2.45, that's at 287, a notch of -3.3 at 957, so more that mid area, then -2 at 1729, Another notch here of negative 1.26, and that's at 2073. A really tight notch, we're taking negative 8.52, and that's going to be at 3,450. So just capturing some of those notch frequencies here. And then negative 4.4, and that's going to be at 4,161. And then lastly, our low pass filter, we actually cut everything below, or got rid of everything above 7,000. Excuse me, can't English say. Above 7,000, gone. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like. So we definitely darkened the tone a little bit, but again, we're doing this for control. If we wanted to brighten it up, we can actually move this up later if we wanted to, but we're gonna leave it for where it is right now. Next is gonna be our multi-band compressor. Yep, here we go. So let's see if we did the same thing with the drums. Oh no, yep, might have done it. Looks like we're doing 20 across the board again, guys. Here we go. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our thresholds then. So obviously attack and release is already set to 20 on all bands. Threshold here is gonna be negative 17.72. Next band is gonna be negative 40.35. The following band is gonna be negative 35.89. Fourth band is going to be negative 32.15, and the last band, the threshold is going to be negative 58.49, really trying to take away that high-end energy there. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like. I'll just play it with this. This is without. And let's play it with. So it sounds like a pretty even sound. Again, it's a darker tone. I might want to go ahead and brighten this up, but for what we used in the final product, this is what we used, but still sounds good to me. So let's see, what do we have next in line here? And our next plugin, looks like it's loading up here. Oh, looks like we have a compressor. This is gonna be by Softtube. It looks like it's an emulation of a 275. So it looks like the attack we have set to slow, the release set to fast. So really going quick with the gain reduction that we're doing here. The gain is set to 6.7. Yeah, gain is set to 6.7, which is kind of funny because it looks like it's more on 3. Let's see. Oh, hold on. Gain reduction's over here. That's gonna be 3.9. Oh, and the gain's at 6.7. Okay, so separate things there. And then we don't have anything with the low cut filter. It looks like the saturation, we have it at 50% on this parallel inject, but the saturation we have all the way set to high. Let's see what this sounds like. I'll just go ahead and play it with. Let's turn it off. So not only are we getting the compression that's going on as well and giving a little bit of that aggressiveness, but it is obviously turning up the gain as well on the final sound there. So let's go ahead and now look here at our next plugins in line, next set of plugins. So it looks like we're using, again, the virtual channel by the VCC channel here on the virtual mix rack. We then have the monster again. Looks like we might have copied similar settings from what we did on the drums. And then lastly, we have a trimmer just to go ahead and pull down the gain a little bit, make sure that we have it balanced with everything else. So looks like we just have the drive set to 6 on the virtual channel, and it's set to USA. The attack is set to 3.96. The release is going to be 5.78, and this is for the monster. The input is at 0, output is at 0. It looks like we don't have any filters on here, high pass filters. This other option, we left it alone here. And then our mix is at 5%. So it's probably not going to even really be anything audible. And then lastly, our trim, which we're taking away -5. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like without and with, starting without. Now with. So really just saturating this with a lot of the tone that's coming up from the console emulation, and obviously we're bringing the gain back down. We're controlling it, bringing it down to the level with everything else in the mix that we have with this trim tool here. And then lastly, let's see what we have. It looks like it's going to be a reverb. Again, if you haven't seen my videos already, I do sometimes like to use reverbs on guitars and on bass, but as you can see, I'm only using 3%. And the reason for that is because when we are recording nowadays, usually we're plugging direct into an interface and we get a very clean, sterilized sound, which sounds good, but then it's our duty to go ahead as mixing engineers to make it sound like it blends well with the rest of the songs. So one thing that you can do actually is send that to a drum sum, everything, all the elements of your mix, so your drums, your bass, your guitars, all to one drum sum, and then adjust the levels of the drum sum. Or you can add reverb like what I'm doing here and add just a little bit. So, but as you can see here on this reverb, this is the one that comes default with Pro Tools. I have it set to a room, a small room. The gain set to 0, and I have it at 3%. Let's go ahead and change this to 100 to hear what this would sound like if we decided to put this all the way. So obviously that's very exaggerated. Let's try something like maybe like 10%. So you can hear it, and as soon as I pause, you might have heard the tail end of the reverb going on there. You can still hear the notes a lot clearer and stuff, but it is taking away a little bit from the attack and the treble of the overall instrument. So that's why we landed on 3. I felt like it added just enough separation so that way it didn't sound too sterile, but at the same time, making it so that way you can still hear the actual individual notes and stuff. So let's take a listen. Out and with. It's very, very subtle, and honestly this is something you can decide whether you want to do that or not. It's just a trick that I use to every now and again. Sometimes when I feel something has a little bit too much of an attack, I can just throw a little bit of reverb somewhere between 3 and 5%. If it tames it and takes care of it, then I don't need to get involved with EQ and other stuff. It works for me. So that covers the bass. Now let's go ahead and move on to the guitars. All right, so we actually are going to go ahead and take a quick listen. So before we actually go ahead and take a quick listen to what we have going on with the guitars, what we're going to go ahead and do is listen to what the drums and bass sound like together. So let's go ahead and do that. Yeah, I'm really happy with how everything balances. You can hear the kick against the bass just fine. You can hear the clickiness of the kick and still hear the notes, the bass well. The snare cuts out very well. Sounds really good to me. Cymbals, again, we had those problems with those notch frequencies, but it doesn't sound like it's exaggerated over the top. It's not hurting my ears when I listen to it. So I'm happy with the way how that sounds. So now let's go ahead and move on to these guitars. All right, so I have the guitar here soloed, and what we're going to go ahead and do is load up the first instance, which is going to be, it looks like Neural DSP Abassi, the Archetype Abassi. So I made this preset here for Wage War. If you happen to have this plugin, what I'll go ahead and do is include the preset so that way you'll be able to go ahead and use this if you would like to. So let's look and see what we did here. Let's listen to just this first part with just this tone alone. Yeah, I really like that tone. So obviously when we're using rhythm guitars, make sure to set this plugin to stereo mode so that way you're not taking a stereo signal, putting it in mono. If you can afford to do it with your CPU, go ahead and set the oversampling on to high instead of normal. Let's run through what we did here from left to right on the amp head. So it looks like we don't have anything on this first notch. Second notch we do have enabled though. It looks like it's a lift on the high end. Gain is set to noon. Actually, everything is set to noon here, so that makes it easy for you. Let's go ahead and, also let's look at the pedals. Do we have anything? Nothing on the pedals, so we're good there. Let's see our EQ, some slight changes. So it looks like minus 1.6 at 250, minus 2.2 at 500, minus 0.2 at 2K, and minus 0.8 at 4K, and then minus 3 at 16, getting a little bit of that treble out of the way with. Let's take a look at what we did here. This is going to be just the 421 that we used here. The position is going to be at 0.5. Level is going to be at -12. Nothing else that we messed around with. And because these are rhythm guitars, we didn't include anything else here on the pedals. So it was as simple as that. You could probably just recreate this yourself, but in case if you want to, I'll go ahead and include this for you here. Oh, and the output is also at -3. So let's hear well, we already heard what it sounds like. So let's actually move on to the next plugin here. So this is going to be the Pro Tools EQ again. So it looks like we went ahead and got rid of everything below 70 just to kind of get rid of that low end information. Again, we don't need. We have, it looks like a broad Q, these first two Qs here. So the first one here, this orange one, is going to be negative 2.3 at 273 hertz, kind of getting a little rid of the low end. Then over here in the lower mid area here, it looks like we're getting a negative a 2.1. Again, that's going to be at about 1,000 hertz. That's 959 actually. And then we have a tight notch at 2,600 hertz, and that's going to be -4, kind of pulling away those notch frequencies. And then negative 1.7 with a wider Q, and that's going to be at 5,400. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like without and with. And now with. Without. With. So I feel with the EQ, it's a little bit more focused. We don't have a lot of the low end that's kind of interrupting everything else. I think we can hear the notes a little bit more clearly. The low end is still a little bit, kind of loud, but let's see what we did with EQ here. So if we jump over to the next plugin, we got some stuff that's going on with the Pro Q3 by FabFilter. So this time we got rid of everything below 60, and we got a ton of bands. So let's go ahead and run through this. Starting from the first one, it's going to be at 166 hertz, and this is going to be negative 1.22. At 224 hertz, we have negative 2.2. At 301 hertz, negative 2.53. We got a very tight notch here of negative 6 at 629. We have another band here. It looks like we're taking away 1.71, and that's going to be at 798. Another tight notch here is going to be negative 6 at 1,203 hertz. We got a lot of bands here grouped together. So let me just carefully run through this. Kind of a little bit of a broader Q here. This is going to be at 1,602 hertz, and this is going to be negative 2.37. A tighter Q, and this is going to be at negative 2 dB, and that's going to be at 1,763. We have this next notch of negative 6. This is going to be at 2,259. And then we have this broader Q again, just a slight dip here of negative 1.16, and that's going to be at 2,433. And we have our last notch of negative 6 again, and this is going to be at 3,309. And then we are getting rid of everything below 8,000, or excuse me, above 8,843. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like, bypassed and then turned on. And on. Off. On. So a completely different tone, and this might be a bit overboard. At this point, really, I could have decided to use a different amp simulation if I'm using this much EQing to get a sound that I like, but I think I was just too determined and far down the rabbit hole where I just decided to do this. And again, I mean, what does it sound like in the end with the mix? If you're happy with the overall sound, then, you have your justification as to why these things are okay. When you're going through these different tones, you can decide whether to cut your losses and use a different amp sim, or try to experiment and see what kind of creative sounds you can make. So if this was a recording like of an actual guitar amp, I wouldn't have a choice. I would have to do something like this. But in a non-destructive environment where you can play around with stuff, you have different options. So, all right, let's look here at our multiband compressor. Oh man, we actually changed the attack and release this time. So let's see what we did here. So our threshold on the first band is going to be negative 25. Attack is going to be at 32.5. Release is at 20. Let's see here. For our second band, negative 24.41. Attack is going to be at 20. Release is at 20. Oh man, it might have been only that one band that we changed the attack. But let's see here. Third band, negative 28.41. Attack at 20. Release at 20. Negative 24.09 for the threshold, attack 20, release 20, and our last band. This is going to be negative 26.75, attack is at 20, release is 20. So I only gave myself one band where I changed the attack out of all this stuff in this session. That's all right though. Let's go ahead and listen to what this sounds like. I'll go ahead and play it with. Without. With. So as you can see on these, the last band, or the bands on each end of the spectrum, on the low end starting with it, it's really pulling down on that low end to make sure that those that low end isn't getting in the way with the articulation of everything else that's going on. And the high end, we're just trying to make sure we don't have a lot of that scratchiness that can come sometimes from the guitars. So that's what we did there. All right, next in line, what did we do? Virtual mix rack again. We use the console emulation. The drive's at 6, but we're using the Brit 4K this time. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like. This is with, without, and with. So it's definitely bringing some life back into the guitars, especially with the amount of cutting that we did in the EQ and stuff. This, I feel, is giving a little bit more of that console emulation and life that it so desperately needs. But, you know, I'm happy with how it sounds. And again, we're going to listen to what it sounds like in the mix. And again, we use the reverb trick again that I mentioned here to give it a little bit of sense of space. Looks like we use 6% this time. So what I'm actually going to go ahead and do is play all of these together, the drums, the guitar, and the bass. So let's take a listen. Yeah, I think that sounds pretty good to me. So excellent. So now that has everything covered for, again, the kicks, the drums, the bass, and the guitar. We're going to move on to the last bit of the guitars, and then we'll move on to the synthesizers and effects. So let's go ahead and look at those. All right, so to start off, what we're going to go ahead and do here is look at this center telephone guitar. Looks like we copied a lot of the same things here, so I'll keep it kind of brief. We'll look at them, but I really don't think too much has changed. So we're using the same, looks like amp sim, EQ, let's see. Yep, same EQ settings. Also for the second set of EQ, that's going to be the Fab Filter Pro. And then we have, instead of all this other stuff that's going on the tail end, this is where we start to change things up. So we have this telephone guitar effect. If you have Pro Tools, you simply go down to vocals, and then you'll hit the 7-band telephone, and we'll go ahead and do is just cut the low and the high ends and boost the mids in this area. You sometimes need to play around with it to find what's appropriate for the song. If you don't have this plugin, simply right here, as you can see, looks like we had a slope of 18, frequencies 304, and then on the high end, it looks like we have 2,730 is the frequency, slope is also at that 18, and then we have a boost of 6 dB, and that's going to be here at, let's see, 1,500 hertz, and then on the output we actually lowered it over minus 7 dB. And the reason for that is because when we're doing something like this, it can be very brittle sounding, and to have these like higher frequencies up here, just in your ear. So we pull them back to just balance them out with the rest of the sounds of the song. So that's that. And then let's see, next is going to be our reverb. This is actually only at 3. Again, just that sense of space. But what's really giving it a little bit more space to move around in, because I don't like just to use just a regular telephone guitar, especially like in the intros. Sometimes, like if it's a transition piece, I might have it a little bit more dry, but I want to have something that kind of can move a bit. I have this delay here. You can use whatever delay you want, but what I have here, it looks like it's going to be on a quarter note offset. So this would have been a quarter note as well. I just moved it a little bit so it's a little offset to get a little bit of a ping pong effect. The feedback's on 26%. I have nothing on the low pass filter, and then the percentage on it is 16% on each one. So let's listen to what this sounds like. I'll go ahead and solo it. So you can hear that delay. Sorry, you can hear that delay here, but if I went ahead and turned that off, let's take a listen to what that sounds like again. And that doesn't sound bad, but it's sometimes in intros where there's nothing else being played, like I do have a drone later on that will be played as well. in conjunction with this. But when there's not really too many elements going on at the beginning of your song, I don't necessarily like to have it all the way up front, the center telephone guitar effects. So adding a little delay on here will help with that as well. So that covers the telephone guitar leading into the first verse or the first riff. So let's go ahead and look now in the lead guitars and see what we did here. So it looks like we used the same exact same exact amp sim here. I'm sorry, I'm just making sure I didn't make any changes here on the actual tone. Looks to be all the same. Nothing different here. Let's make sure that we have nothing on the effects that's on. Yep, we're good there, because usually I'll do the post-processing on the effects later down the chain. Looks like we are using the same exact type of EQ settings as we did before, but where we start to do something differently here is we're using the delay and then the reverb. So for the delay, it looks like it's the same as the rhythm guitar where we have like these quarter notes that are going on. The only thing that we've done is increase the percentage, the wet to dry mix, to 30%. And aside from that, it doesn't look like we have any real differences. And then lastly, we have what is probably one of my favorite reverbs to use on guitars, shimmer, just adding that really nice ambient effect to it. So let's go ahead and solo this and take a listen. Sounds really good. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like in the mix leading up to it. I'll start a few bars behind. So really it's just supposed to be used kind of leading up to it, just that extra additional layer to it, but I like it, sounds good. And that covers all the guitars. So let's go ahead and take a look at the synths and the sound effects. Okay, so let's go ahead and just take these tracks here. I'm gonna make them small really quickly. We're gonna go ahead and focus on the synths first, and then we'll go ahead and worry about the actual effects. So I'm gonna just make sure to mute these. And let's go ahead and make these a little bit bigger. So let's start with this buzz synth. Let's hear what this sounds like by itself really quickly. Let's unmute it really quickly here too. And this is at -19. I'll bring it up really quickly. So it sounds really cool on its own. And again, this is just adding a bit of depth, like an extra layer to the guitars during the times when they're playing, that main riff. So we just want to add a little bit more energy to that area. So let's see what other processing we did though. Again, it sounds good, but we use this lo-fi plugin that comes standard with Pro Tools. If you don't have this, there's other lo-fi plugins that you can use as well. But it looks like we used these three elements here. We used the linear quantization. The hertz here for the sample rate is going to be 5,512. Sample size we left at 24. The anti-alias we left at 16%. And then saturation we boosted a little bit here at 0.5. So let's listen to this now. This is with. Without. And with. And to me, that sounds really cool. It has a bit of kind of like an 8-bit feel. I mean, that's really what you're doing, is just kind of distorting it and stuff, taking some information from it and manipulating it, but it sounds good. So let's go ahead and look at the next one here, which is going to be Sidewinder. This is going to be a JST plugin. This is going to kind of change a little bit of the width. Let's see if I'm even using it here, because it looks like it's just set to the middle. So. So I went ahead and added some additional width to it. It looks like I had it just on the default setting, so I just changed it up a little bit there. And lastly, let's look at our delay. Delay, it's going to be the same quarter notes as before. It looks like we're just using only 5% though on the mix, and the feedback, we've changed it to 26%. So let's take a listen. Awesome. So it's kind of more like kind of a slap delay. And again, it's very, very subtle. It's only 5%. Let me go ahead and lower this back down to 19, just so that way we have a control and balance with the rest of the mix. Let's look at the next synth here. So remember, this one is going to be from FabFilter 1. So it looks like we're using Sidewinder again for the stereo width. Looks like this one I did change. This is at 70. Let's take a listen to what this is doing. First without and then with. Let's also turn this up. With. So definitely adding some stereo spread there. Awesome. So yeah, you can definitely hear it moving around in the stereo image. I like that. Let's go ahead and look here at the EQ, or EQ, excuse me, the delay. So it's at 15% this time, different from what we did to the Buzz synth. So this is going to give us a little bit more of that kind of slap back delay. So let's take a listen. I like that. And let's go ahead and turn it off. Yeah, I like it. Sounds really good. So we're going to play these two together. They're going to be kind of quiet. Let's see if we can hear them. Yeah, maybe a little too quiet from what we can hear. But again, with the rest of the mix, it just adds a little bit of layer to it. And that's all it's really supposed to be doing there. Okay, next thing we're going to go ahead and look at this drone. I'm going to go ahead and turn up the size of the wave file so you can see this here, because you can't really see it if I brought it back down to the normal setting. So you can slightly see it there. Actually, there we go. This is what it's normally supposed to be. Yeah, so you normally can't see it at all. But I didn't do any processing on this. I left it at 0. Again, this is just supposed to be our lead into the rest of the other instruments going into this first riff. So let's take a listen. I really like the way how that patch sounds on it by itself. If we wanted to add a little bit more ambience, we could probably use something like Sidewinder again, and maybe use like Shimmer to add a little bit more space to it. But on its own, I was very happy and very pleased with the way it sounded. So let's go ahead and now look at the impacts and the bass drops. Okay, so starting with this impact here, I may need to, nope, there we go, I can see it just fine. Let's go ahead and solo this. So let's take one more listen to this. All right, it's at -4. I can turn it up a little bit for you guys. So it sounds good on its own. Looks like we're using Sidewinder again for a little bit of a stereo image. Yeah, I like that. Sounds interesting. Sounds nice. And then it looks like we are using Verb, which is the default reverb that comes with Pro Tools. We're using a large plate. The decay is going to be 3 seconds. Doesn't look like we have any pre-delay that's going on. And we have this set to 35%. Let's take a listen. Without. So it's subtle, but I think it's just to kind of separate it that way. It's not too upfront. It does have a little bit of treble to it. So I think this was just to kind of tame the attack a little bit there. And then let's listen to that with our bass drop that's at -7. Yeah, just adding a little bit of effect to that. So I'm going to return these back to their normal volume, and that's it. That should be everything that is mixed. Let's see how this how this sounds like leading into this, because this is going to lead from, I believe, the chorus into the main riff. So let's take a listen here. Yeah, to me, that's balanced all very well together. And again, I'm really happy with the way how this sounds so far, especially with the amount of EQing that we had to do to those guitars. I'm very happy with how they're all collectively combining together as one solid thing. So last thing we're going to go ahead and do is take a look at what we did on the mix bus. So let's go ahead and look at it. Okay, so just as a quick reminder, before we actually get started here, things are going to start to get louder as we progress. So to make sure to turn down your headphones or your monitors, I will be doing the same as we move along. I just want to go ahead and leave you with that last bit of information here. So starting with the first plugin in the master bus, it looks like we're using the virtual mix bus by Slate. This is the Trident setting that we're using here. Doesn't look like we messed around with anything else. And let's go ahead and see what we did for an for compression. So as the main bus compressor, it looks like we use the, what is this? The FG Red, also by Slate. Threshold's at -7.5, ratio is at 4, the attack is at 5.8 with a release of 1. And it looks like the drive, we have it, we've turned it up to 1.7. We didn't do anything on the high pass filter, which is usually something I mess around with, but for this track, I guess we didn't. And the mix is at 100%. Let's start with just listening what those two sound like without and with. I'll start without, and let's listen to this one section. Awesome. Let's listen to that again now with them. All right, so it actually doesn't look like we're doing too much actually with this compressor. Might have just left it on there by mistake, but that's all right. I'll go ahead, since we have this now, I'll turn down the threshold, see if we can get a sound that we like. If not, we'll just get rid of it. So let's go ahead and play back and take a listen. I'll give us a larger sample piece to work with, so let's start here. All right, that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So threshold actually brought it to a negative 11.6, and then the mix, what I did just so that way we have a nice blended version, is at 59%. So we'll keep it there. Let's go ahead and look what we did EQ wise. So it looks like we've done some notches here, some kind of subtle stuff, nothing too dramatic, but everything below 20 we've went ahead and removed. And let's run through these notches. So starting at 108 hertz, we did minus 1.3 dB. Then at 147, minus 2. At 220, minus 1.3. At 293, negative 1.33. At 375, negative 2. Negative 2 again, but this one's going to be at 444. And then negative 2 again, and this is going to be at 1004. Then we have at 1192, negative 2. 2034 is going to be negative 2. I think these last two, yeah, both of these are going to be negative 2. So this one's going to be 3278, and then the last one's going to be 4448. So let's take a listen to what that does. This is without. This is with. Awesome. So for me, it sounds better balanced and stuff. I know as we do compression stuff, more things are going to be more audible. So it looks like we did this to be able to help with that interaction with the compressor. Now, as I say in all my videos, I'm not a mastering engineer. I never pretend to be. As you can see, I'm using headphones and I have my Yamaha speakers. And I'm in an untreated room. So I am the last place, or I should be the last person to ask when it comes to mastering what you should do. However, I am trying to make decisions what I think is the best, especially if you're doing home recording and stuff. Maybe the bands that you're recording don't have access to a mastering engineer. You got to do whatever's best for them, what's going to yield the best result. So that's kind of the same mentality that I've applied when it comes to doing my my master bus here. So that covers the EQ. Let's go ahead and move on to our multi-band compressor. Let's see. I swear to God, if I do 20% again on everything, I'm gonna lose it. All right. Oh no, this isn't a good sign. All right, so 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%. I'm gonna go to bed. Okay, anyways, well, at least we know the attack and release what those are going to be. So let's go ahead and just run through the thresholds here. So, I mean, I swear in the comment section, all I'm going to see is just 20%. If I see that, I'll lose my mind. All right, so threshold here on the first band is going to be negative 12.33. Second is going to be negative 20.42. Third band is going to be negative 24.96. Fourth band is going to be negative 16.78, and the last band is going to be negative 13.44. Awesome. So that handles that. Let's take a listen. I'm going to just play what it sounds like with, and we can visually see what it's doing. So as you can see, it's really just bringing down the kick when it's kicking in, no pun intended. And then also that body, that low end of the snare, it's just pulling it down when it's being hit really, really hard. Everything else, it looks like it's subtly kind of, just keeping it tame, but nothing as dramatic as what we saw with the kick and snare there. And then lastly, this is where I'm going to go ahead and take the moment to remind you the final time, turn down your headphones because we have our limiter. I didn't use Ozone for once. I decided to go ahead and go at my own. I don't know if it produced, the best results, but hey, we gave it a shot. So this is going to be the L3LL Ultra limiter. This is by Waves here. This is kind of an interesting limiter to use. Aside from the fact that you can set the ceiling to, whatever you want to in your threshold, just like most limiters. You have the dithering options, you have the shape as well, but you also have this profile. It looks like I set it to basic, but if we go to this menu, you can see that it adds a little bit of different colors to the different types of of, you know, or different types of profiles that add different colors to your mix. That's the best way to say it. So it looks like I had it set to basic, but when I play this, I'll go ahead and switch through them. That way, maybe you can hear what those different changes are going to sound like. So let's go ahead and run through it. Again, last time, turn down your monitors, turn down your headphones if you need to now. All right, here we go. And then back to that basic profile. So as you can hear, there's different profiles that you can use to give that final little bit of shape and sound. To be honest, I think the one that I liked the most, the two of them, in my opinion, that I liked was probably going to be the semi-separated and the loud and proud. Again, when I printed this track, I used the basic profile. Hearing it now again, I would have done the semi-separated or the loud and proud. So anyways, that is it. Now we have the mix finally complete. You saw what samples we used. You saw what tools we used to be able to shape and craft them to get the final result that we did get there. So thank you so much for sticking till the end. Now I will ask you, if you are enjoying this content, as I always say, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell. I'm doing a ton of more videos, including plugins to review, which is just going to be going over different types of plugins, especially like analog ones that maybe people aren't as familiar with. I know every day someone's being inspired to want to become a mixing engineer, or they want to record their bands, and sometimes they get access to these tools, but they don't know what these tools do. Again, because they're analog, they're a little bit different than what you might see normally today. So I'll be sharing with you on how some of those plugins work when they're brought into a plugin format, and that way you know how to use them properly. Again, I got a ton more videos of different mix breakdowns, as well as songs that I've recreated. I haven't planned out for more than a month out, so please make sure to go ahead and subscribe. If you want to support the channel in another way, we do have the Patreon. If you go to the link down below in the description, you can go ahead and click that. It's $3 a month. It's just to support the channel. I'm going to be including other content there. I do have 2 drum sample packs that I will be having for sale. I don't know if I will just include that as a part of the membership, or you do just have to do a one-time purchase for them. But whatever the case may be, we'll figure that out at a later time. But again, if you can do the Patreon, it means a lot to me. Leave comments on how you're enjoying this. Please do not put 20%. I will lose my mind. I swear to God, if you put 20% in the comments, don't do it. Anyways, thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you at the next video.